Have you ever seen an Azure environment that looked perfectly designed on paper, but then became a nightmare to manage 6 months later? Every application was connected to everything else, nobody knew how traffic was flowing, new projects took longer and longer to deploy. Security teams struggled to understand exposure, operation teams couldn't quickly troubleshoot issues, and every architecture review seemed to start with the same sentence. We didn't think we'd grow this quickly. The funny thing is that networking rarely gets the attention it deserves at the beginning of a cloud journey. Most organizations focus on applications, they focus on migration, they focus on costs, focus on security, but very few people get excited about designing a network until something goes wrong. Then suddenly everybody cares about networking. The reality is that networking architecture is one of the most important design decisions you're ever going to make in Azure. A good network design creates flexibility. A poor network design creates technical debt. A good network design supports security. A poor design creates risk. A good design enables growth, whereas a poor network design, eventually, it's going to hit limits. In the last episode, we built our client identity strategy using Microsoft Entra. We established principles around access, privilege, and security. Today, we're going to design the road system that connects everything together. We're going to explore how Azure consultants think about networking, connectivity, like segmentation, making sure we plan for growth and operational simplicity. Because great Azure networks aren't designed for today. They're actually designed for what the business will become tomorrow. When customers first begin their Azure journey, I often hear something like this. We only need a few workloads to start with. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable, but I've learned that cloud environments rarely shrink. They almost always grow. Today's 3 workloads become tomorrow's 30. Today's single application becomes tomorrow's application portfolio. Simple requirements become tomorrow's complex business dependencies. This is one reason Microsoft includes networking as a foundational consideration within Azure landing zones and the cloud adoption framework guidance. The network should actually support connectivity, governance, security, and future workload growth rather than being treated as an isolated technical component. When I design a network, I'm not trying to solve today's problem, I'm actually trying to avoid tomorrow's problems. Because networking is one of the hardest things to redesign once an environment becomes mature. Moving a server is relatively easy, right? Changing permissions can be quite easy. Redesigning an entire network that hundreds of workloads depend on, that's much harder. Which is why network planning deserves careful attention from the start. Before we begin drawing architectures, let's actually revisit what we actually know about our customer, right? In this whole kind of series. So they have around 500 users. They currently operate primarily from an on-premises environment, right? We know they have offices in Australia and the UK, They're planning international growth, we know that. They have a small IT operations team as well, and they want an Azure platform that is going to remain secure, scalable, and manageable. Notice what we're doing, right? We're starting with business requirements again, not technology, but business requirements. Because if our network design doesn't support the business, then it doesn't matter how technically elegant it actually appears. One of the biggest mistakes I see architects make is designing networking sort of exclusively from a technical perspective. I've done it myself as well before. The business rarely cares whether a design looks impressive. The business cares whether it supports growth, reliability, security, and operational efficiency. So before I think about, routers and gateways and firewalls or even connectivity models, I first think about the business outcomes. One of my favorite ways of explaining Azure networking is through city planning, right? Imagine you're designing a new city. You wouldn't start by randomly building roads, right? You wouldn't connect every building directly to every other building. You wouldn't even create intersections without understanding traffic flow. And you wouldn't assume the city will never grow. Instead, you'd establish a plan, right? You think about how people move through that city, right? You think about shared infrastructure and think about sort of future expansion. Safety is another one. And you think about maintaining it. Azure networking works very similarly. Applications need connectivity. Users need access. Services need communication paths. Traffic needs direction. We talk about security controls, right? They need enforcement. And everything needs room to grow. The role of an architect is to create structure before complexity arrives, because structure becomes incredibly valuable as environments scale. One of the first things I discuss with customers is avoiding unnecessary complexity while also avoiding future chaos. Many organizations begin cloud adoption with a very sort of flat network design. Everything lives together. Everything can potentially communicate with everything else. Look, initially this feels really easy. There are fewer moving parts, setup's quick, teams can move fast. The problem appears later. As workloads grow, the environment becomes increasingly difficult to manage. Applications become tightly coupled. Security boundaries become unclear. Troubleshooting becomes much harder. Even compliance becomes harder. Risk increases. Microsoft's networking guidance highlights organizations often move toward more sort of structured topologies because they need shared services, right? They need traffic control and a centralized management as well as separation between workloads. This is why consultants often think about segmentation early. Not because we actually enjoy creating boundaries, but because boundaries create clarity. If you spend any time in Azure architecture discussions, you've probably heard the phrase hub and spoke. For some people, the moment networking becomes sort of too technical is a moment they stop paying attention. So let's simplify it. Let's imagine an airport, right? You have a central hub airport. Then multiple regional airports connect into that hub. People can move visually because there is structure. That's essentially the idea behind hub and spoke networking. Microsoft describes hub and spoke as a topology where shared services are centralized within a hub network, while separate workloads operate within spoke networks. Shared services such as connectivity, security controls, and management capabilities can be provided centrally. What I like about this concept is that it aligns with how organizations operate. Most companies have common services that everyone uses. Security services, right? Connectivity services, is what we're talking about, monitoring services, and identity services. By centralizing certain capabilities, we avoid unnecessary duplication while creating consistency, right? For our client, a hub and spoke approach aligns nicely with their sort of growth ambitions because it allows future workloads to plug into an established foundation rather than building everything from scratch each time. Let's talk about something many cloud projects underestimate. The majority of Azure journeys are not purely cloud journeys. They're actually hybrid journeys. Customers don't wake up one morning and move every system overnight. Instead, cloud and on-premises environments often coexist for many years. Our client is a perfect example, right? They still have on-premises systems. They still have existing business processes, applications as well that may take time to migrate. That means connectivity becomes extremely important. Microsoft's networking architecture guidance, again, if you look at that, it includes hybrid connectivity as a fundamental design area because many environments need secure communication between Azure resources and their existing on-premises systems. As consultants, we need to design for reality. And reality is usually hybrid, at least for a while. Right? The question isn't whether hybrid connectivity exists. The question is how well we prepare for it. One architectural lesson that becomes clearer every year to me is that networking and security cannot be treated as separate conversations. Historically, network teams manage the network. Security teams manage security. Cloud architectures kind of blurred those boundaries. Today, security considerations, they influence networking decisions from day one, right? That's one reason network segmentation is so important. Not every workload should communicate with every other workload, right? Not every application should have unrestricted access. Not every system should be exposed unnecessarily. Good network architecture supports security objectives. Bad network architecture actively works against them. I often explain to customers like this. We're not trying to stop people from getting where they need to go. We're actually trying to ensure they only go where they should go. That small distinction changes everything because networking isn't just about connectivity, it's also about control. One trap I see some architects fall into is designing networks that are technically brilliant but operationally painful. The diagrams look amazing. The architecture review board loves it. Everyone's really impressed. Then the operation team actually inherits it, and that's when the problems actually begin. The customer has to actually manage it, right? They have to support it, and they have to troubleshoot any issues. If we talk about our client, we already know they have a relatively small IT team. That fact alone should influence our design decisions. The architecture should scale, but it should also remain understandable. I always remind customers that simplicity and scalability are not opposites. In fact, the best architectures usually achieve both. As consultants, one of our responsibilities is protecting customers from unnecessary complexity, because complexity actually creates operational risk, and operational risk will eventually become business risk. Let's actually revisit one of our clients' business objectives, right? International expansion. This is where networking starts becoming very, very strategic, right? A local business and a global business have different requirements. Latency matters even more. Connectivity matters even more. Regional considerations become much more important. Right? We talk about future acquisitions as well, they're going to become more and more likely. Network architecture must be able to accommodate these possibilities, right? Again, notice I didn't say we need to design everything for 50 countries today. That would be over engineering. But we should make decisions that leave room for growth, right? Good architecture doesn't predict the future perfectly. It simply avoids making future growth unnecessarily difficult. That's one of the key ways consultants create value, right? We're not just solving current requirements, we're reducing future constraints. If you're enjoying the Azure Consultant Playbook series, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments, right? What's the biggest networking challenge you've seen in Azure? Was it connectivity? Even security? Was it hybrid networking? Poor planning, or maybe inherited technical debt that nobody wanted to touch? Let me know below, because networking stories are often some of the most interesting lessons cloud professionals experience. Now let's move into this episode's Consultant Copilot Corner. One of the biggest advantages of AI for consultants is the ability to explore architectural options quickly. Let's imagine we've completed our discovery workshops with our client, right? We know the business goals, right? We know how they plan to grow. We know the operational constraints and the security priorities. A modern consultant could use Microsoft Copilot to generate an initial networking recommendation, right? The AI might recommend a hub and spoke model. It might identify connectivity requirements, might even suggest segmentation strategies, right? It might propose approaches for international growth. And honestly, many of those recommendations would probably make sense. But this is where consultant expertise becomes valuable. Because architecture isn't simply about generating possibilities. It's about making trade-offs, right? AI doesn't attend board meetings, right? It doesn't understand organizational politics, doesn't understand budget constraints, or understand the experience level of your operations team. It can generate options, it cannot own decisions. One prompt I might use is something like this, right? Review the following business requirements and propose 3 Azure networking approaches. Compare scalability, operational complexity, security considerations, and future growth implications. That's valuable, not because AI gives us the answer, but because it gives us additional perspectives to evaluate. The consultant's role then becomes reviewing those options and selecting the one that best aligns with the customer's goals. Just like we've discussed throughout this series, right? AI helps us think faster. Experience helps us think better. At the end of this networking phase, what are we trying to actually achieve? Right? We're not trying to build the most complicated network possible. We're not trying to win architectural awards. We're trying to create a network that supports business outcomes. For our specific client, success means secure connectivity. It means support for hybrid operations. We want room for international growth, right? It means clear operational ownership, right? And it means support for governance and security. And ultimately, it means creating a network foundation that won't need a major redesign every time the organization grows. That's what good architecture should deliver. Confidence, not complexity. At this point, our Azure platform is starting to come together, right? We've completed discovery. We've designed the landing zone. We've actually established our identity strategy as well, haven't we? And we've built our networking foundation. Now we need to answer one of the most important questions every customer eventually asks. How do we actually secure all this? In episode 5, we're going to build the customer's Azure security architecture. Right, we're going to explore how consultants think about zero trust, things like risk reduction, cyber resiliency, Azure native security capabilities, and creating security foundations that enable the business rather than slow it down. And of course, right, we'll use AI inside Consultant Copilot Corner to review security recommendations, but also compare AI-generated advice with real-world consulting judgment. Look, if you found this episode valuable, make sure you subscribe and enable notifications as well so you don't miss episode 5 of the Azure Consultant Playbook AI Edition. If you know someone planning an Azure migration or designing cloud architecture, share this video with them. Before you go, answer this question in the comments for me. If you could redesign one thing about your current network environment, what would it be? I'd genuinely love to see the answers. Thanks for watching, and remember, applications may get the spotlight, security may get headlines. But network architecture is often the foundation that determines whether everything else succeeds.